Today let's talk about the Canon RF 85mm 1.2 L USM lens. This is not the DS version, this is the L USM version, and this is one heck of a lens. This is an amazing lens, 1.2 kilos in weight, so quite a heavy weight, and nicely built, very nicely built. I used this lens for about 7 days, took a bunch of portraits and also some other pictures. Beautifully built. 1.2 is about half a step brighter than 1.4, mind you, so that is significant in low light. So we'll look at some image files, we'll look at what kind of bokeh it produces, and sharpness and other characteristics of the lens. But before that, let's talk about the fundamentals. This is a heavy lens, like I said, at 1.2 kilos. This is a pretty heavy lens, but overall the lens is simple. If you look at the design, the lens is simple. It's got a 82 filter thread, similar to the 105 1.4 Nikon. But if you look at the front element, this front element is actually smaller than the 85 1.4. The Canon front element looks a bit smaller than the actual lens element, actually looks a bit smaller than this Nikon 105 1.4. I don't know if you can see this. The lens is well built, it is dust and moisture resistant, and it's also got 13 elements in 9 groups. To be honest, it doesn't sound like many elements, only 13 elements in 9 groups. But despite that, you have a tremendous amount of sharpness in this lens. So the quality of glass that Canon is using this lens is something else. It's amazing, right? So this is a special lens out of it. It's a very expensive lens, about more than 2,000 US dollars. But the joy that it is while using it in low light, it just smacks the background into blur, into bokeh, into beautiful jumbled up, beautiful smooth bokeh. In fact, not jumbled up. Every time you shoot a portrait with this. It's something else altogether, right? It's got a simple AF/MF button here, a simple AF/MF button, and there's a simple control ring. Control ring feels a bit light, honestly. It makes a bit of sound, the clicking sound. Apparently, if you pay some money to Canon, they can declick this control ring, but it makes some sound. It's very light to move. You can just move it with one finger. Feels a bit plasticky, to be honest, slightly plasticky. The manual focus ring here, the rubberized manual focus ring, actually moves quite nicely. This is well done. This is quite nice. Feels built well, but the material feels like they're made of high quality, thick, high quality plastic. The autofocus motor is superb. It's very strong, but the autofocus motor is actually can make some sound while focusing. So I'll show you a clip here right now where you will see that it makes some clicking sound when it's trying to focus. So it's not much of a bother really, because at 85mm you're not likely to sort of come sit close to the camera and talk, so you're likely to use a mic, an external mic. So this noise from the lens should not matter. In my test, I did not see much focus breathing. I'm going to play a video here. You'll see, even if there is any amount of focus breathing, it is very low. It's a minimum amount of focus breathing. It's not much. Lens, it's got 9 diaphragms, so it's not like it's got 11 or 12 diaphragms. It's not working with a number of diaphragms, and despite that, the bokeh is exceedingly smooth. And we'll get into the bokeh later on. So now let's get into some tests and let's get into the details of this lens, and you should decide for yourself whether you should spend money on getting 5-6 cheap 1.8 lenses, or just get maybe a couple of 1.2 lenses from Canon. So I have no problem when it comes to photography autofocus in this lens, but when it comes to video autofocus, there seems to be some inconsistency, especially in this scene. As you can see, when she's close to the lens, the camera takes a bit of time to actually notice her and then focus on her. It's only when she's away from the lens that the lens can actually focus on her. Also, I must say that the lens makes quite a bit of noise while autofocusing. It reminds me of old Nikon DSLR f mount Nikon lenses.
Coming closer, they're not scared of humans. That I have understood. Because I think this is an real reality.
There is some amount of focus breathing. It's not a lot, but there is definitely some amount of focus breathing in this lens. One area where this lens absolutely rules is in its sharpness. The crisp, sharp details in this coming from this lens is unbeatable, and the way it resolves on the 45 megapixel Canon R5 is just brilliant. I mean, look at these images. I've zoomed in almost 500-600% into these images, and I can see every detail on these birds. On this 85 lens, these little birds were about 15 to 20 feet away from me, and then after that I've zoomed in by some 500%, and you still see this much detail. Now the one thing that you buy this lens for is bokeh, and you get plenty of that in this lens if you have the right circumstance. I mean, the kind of bokeh you will get in the background is just mind-boggling. It's just amazing, beautiful, and smooth. And let me tell you, it's very difficult to get the same look even on a 50 1.2. Perhaps on the 58 Nikon Noct, yes, but other than that, it's a very unique look that you get on an 85 1.2. Early March 2023, the Canon 85 1.2 is still the only 85 1.2 on the market that is available for you to buy. I must say that you start seeing a lot of cat's eye bokeh just beyond the middle of the image here on this lens. And you do not have to go to the extreme left and the extreme right to start seeing some cat's eye bokeh, which means that maybe the image circle of this lens is not very wide, and I expect the Nikon 85 1.2 to not do this because the Z mount is a larger mount. Also, I don't know if I'm imagining this, but is there some amount of bubble bokeh in these pictures that you see? I see that when there's a little bit of a busy background, there is this seems like there's some soap bubble bokeh sort of look in the background, and that's very interesting for me. Now, one of the interesting characteristic of this lens is that there appears to be some amount of 3D pop in this lens. It's like there's a bit of dimensionality. You can almost sense depth in these images. You can almost understand how far the background is, how far that car is behind her, how far that pillar is behind her. You can almost mentally gauge that, which means that it has the 3D pop, the three dimensionality to this image, which is very pleasant to see, and that adds a lot of character, lot of realism to the pictures that you get out of this lens. Now, before I talk about the ghosting on the 85 1.2 by Canon, let me give you two examples. This is the Nikon 70 to 200 f2.8. I'm shooting right. It's a very backlit scene, and as you can see, there is there is almost no ghosting, right? And this one again, I'm shooting right into the sun, and you see no spilling over of the sun rays into the picture. Again, I'm shooting into this light, this street light. I see no ghosting there. Now this is the benchmark for me. Now if we come over to the Canon 85 1.2, you see there is a lot of ghosting. I must say, for a lens this expensive, lens this special, there is quite a bit of ghosting on the Canon 85 1.2. So what happens is that when you shoot against the light, you see light spilling over onto the subject and lose sharpness, lose detail, and lose contrast in those areas. Now there is very little aberration and fringing in this lens, and this is 1.2. I'm zooming in some 300-400%, and then I can, it's almost like I'm imagining some green fringing there. So there is very little fringing and chromatic aberration on this lens, which is very good. in practical scenarios while while shooting, I felt that the lens had no problem shooting close, and it has a close focusing distance of 2.8 feet or 0.85 meters, which is standard. But I had absolutely zero problem trying to come close to the subject and then shoot. So overall, I must say this was a wonderful experience shooting with 85 1.2. When I had the lens with me, when I uh, took this lens out for 7 or 10 days, almost 10 days, uh, there was no Nikon 85 1.2 in the vicinity. And I must say, I have to tell you that this was a great experience. This is a unique experience for me to shoot with this lens. And so I'm looking forward to the Nikon version of this lens. And I would like to show you a direct comparison between this lens and the Nikon lens when I have my hands on the Nikon lens sometime this month. So sadly, I have to give this lens back to Canon, and this was a wonderful experience for me, honestly. And after using this lens particularly, I am longing for the Z mount 85 1.2. So if this kind of content is for you, do like this video and subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way in helping me out. And if you like this kind of conversation, do share your opinions in the comment section and subscribe. I'm going to see you very soon with another one.